I've never played a Xenoblade game, ever. But to be honest, I never really cared to. Sure, it interested me here and there, but there was just something about the gameplay and the look of it that felt a little overwhelming to get into. And then Nintendo graced us with this absolute hecker. Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition on the Nintendo Switch. So I thought, wait, this could be my entry point. Most of my reluctancy to play the Xenoblade series stems from the fact that all of these games are over 50 hours long, just for the main story. I mean, seriously, it took me like 6 months to finish the 1,000-Year Door, and that's less than half the length of this thing. So yeah, the idea of spending 50 hours on one game kinda scares me, but I've decided I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna no-life this game and play it for as long as I can, just for this video. But before we jump into the definitive edition of Xenoblade Chronicles X, let's rewind a second. Xenoblade Chronicles X was released on December 4th, 2015, exclusively for the Nintendo Wii U, developed by Monolith Soft. It was a spiritual successor to the original Xenoblade Chronicles rather than a direct sequel, featuring a completely new cast, setting, and story. And yes, the Wii U. We all know the drill, it wasn't exactly a console with the biggest player base, which kind of doomed this game from the start. Despite that, Xenoblade Chronicles X actually sold pretty well, around 840,000 copies worldwide. That's solid, but not exactly mind-blowing, especially when you compare it to what the series is pulling now on the Switch. Critics mostly liked it too. People praised the massive open world, the ambition, and the sheer depth. But still, it didn't quite break through. The game also built up a cult following over the years, but the problem was that it was stuck on a dying console. And even when the Switch became a hit and other Wii U games like Mario Kart 8, Pikmin 3, and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze got shiny re-releases, Xenoblade X was nowhere to be found for years. But why? Well, in interviews, Monolith Soft actually said porting Xenoblade X would be a lot more difficult than it looks. The game was built around the Wii U's dual screen setup and a custom engine, so getting it to run on the Switch would take serious reworking, not just a quick upscale and go. Plus, Monolith Soft was busy with Xenoblade 2, Torna, and then 3. It just kept getting pushed back. So now, nearly a decade later, Nintendo's finally giving the game another shot with a definitive edition on the Switch. And somehow they made the game half the size of the original. What? Honestly, how is this even possible? But let's actually crack open the game and get started. The opening cutscene sets the stage for the plot. Earth gets absolutely pwned in the middle of this huge alien war, just deceased. But some humans manage to escape just in time on these massive space arc ships. One of those ships is called the White Whale, and it ends up crash landing on a mysterious planet called Mira. This is the main world that you'll be playing on for the entirety of the game. You wake up as some guy or gal that you've created. Shout out to my character who looks just like me. And you get recruited into a group called Blade. Their job is pretty much do everything on the planet while everyone's still figuring out what Mira even is. Exploring the world, fighting monsters, recovering scattered parts of the ship, helping survivors. Basically, every task imaginable is dumped on you. Your main base is this big city called New LA. Yes, they literally brought Los Angeles to space. And from there, the rest of the game is you trying to help humanity not, completely die. And that's a basic summary of your goal. It's super engaging at first. It was simple to understand, and it makes you play as your own character, which you can customize to your liking. I didn't find too many options though, and personally, I always prefer having a set main character with a defined story instead of a create your own type. Because, well, let's be honest, custom characters are usually pretty lifeless in video games. They barely talk, if at all, and most of the time it's someone else doing all the talking for you, or it's just this awkward pause when you respond with silence. All right, so let's talk about the gameplay here. And yes, it's complicated. I know a lot of hardcore fans might disagree with that statement, but remember, I barely play JRPGs. Like I suspected going into this isn't some basic gameplay loop where you just walk around smashing enemies with one button. You can't just roll up to something, hit it, and then hide behind a rock to avoid damage. Here's how it works. Once combat starts, whether you initiate it or an enemy picks a fight with you, you lock on and a row of arts appear on the bottom of the screen. Simple enough so far. Each art has a cooldown timer, so after you use one, you'll have to wait for it to recharge before using it again. And if you let it fully charge even longer, it can actually get stronger. So the game's always got you juggling which art is ready, which is worth waiting for, and bouncing between them mid-fight. Then there's the squad. Most of the time, you're not alone. You've got a team with you. And thank goodness, or I'd be cooked. And they'll occasionally shout out cues during battle. If you match your art with what they're calling for, that move gets a bonus. And the game even helps you up by slapping an exclamation point on it. Now, if you're impatient, like me, and you want to use an art before it's recharged, there's this little green bar at the bottom right corner called the cooldown gauge. You can burn some of that to force an art out early, and the more you fight, the more it builds back up. But we're still not done with combat. We also have TP, which build up during battle and are used for certain stronger moves or abilities that require it. Then there's the soul challenges. This game has a mini quick time events mid-fight. Basically, a circle randomly pops up on screen, and you've got to press the B button at the right time. If you do it right, it restores your team's morale and might even give you some some TP. Ayo, and that's pretty much the battle system, which is insane. I actually can't believe I retained all that. But these battles aren't just for fun. What is this, Walmart? No, this is actually how you progress through the story, collecting gear, and of course leveling up. All right, leveling up. How could I forget? Just kidding, I didn't forget. This is all scripted. So yes, your character does level up, and it's actually really important to keep track of it. It determines what missions you can take on and gives you a solid idea of what monsters you're strong enough to actually fight. You can upgrade your character with better weapons, stronger armor, and boost your skills and class rank to make them more powerful in battle. You can find various weapons just by exploring the world and fighting enemies to your heart's content. A monster slaughtering spree, perhaps. And of course, completing missions will also reward you with new gear. You earn points to upgrade your skills too, which can get very complicated very fast. I ended up just dumping everything I could in my melee attacks. I'm a gamer. You can also change your class, which gives you access to different weapon types and playstyles. This definitely adds a lot more variety to the combat and helps keep it from getting stale across the 50+ hours you'll probably end up sinking into this game. And it's not just your main character you can upgrade. Your entire squad of 3 others can also be fitted with new armor, weapons, and abilities. You gotta scroll through each of them and figure out what is the best loadout for what you're doing. It's honestly a cool mechanic and I love the flexibility of it, but it can get pretty tedious trying to keep track of everyone. And speaking of your squad, there are a bunch of other characters you can recruit throughout the game. As you fight along them, you build up your affinity, basically your bond with that character. And the more you use them, the more they like you. Higher affinity means better performance in battle, and in some cases, it's actually required to access certain missions. And all of this, I didn't even realize you could do until playing a few hours of the game. I must have either missed the tutorials, or I didn't understand what it was trying to tell me. This game throws so much at you so fast when you start. It's easy to overlook important systems and then suddenly realize 5 hours later that you could have been way stronger the whole time. Let's talk about missions. Because yes, there's a lot of them. First, there's the story missions, the big ones that actually move the plot forward. They usually come with some kind of level requirement, and half the time they're locked behind a checklist, like reach this level, complete one super obscure affinity mission, and explore this much of the world. When I play any game, these are the missions I always prioritize. Not only do I want to see more of the story, which is actually pretty good, but my goal is to always roll the main credits. That's my goal. That's what I strive for. It makes you check off all these random boxes first, which definitely pads out the playtime. Then there are the affinity missions. These are the character-focused quests that give you more backstory on your party members and flesh out the world. Some of them are actually entertaining. Others feel like you're watching a paint drying simulator. I'm serious. At first, I'd sit through every cutscene, but once I realized most of these had no impact on the main plot, or at least a big part, I started skipping them to save some time. The real problem is how particular these missions can be. Sometimes you need specific characters in your party. Sometimes your affinity with them needs to be at a certain level. Sometimes they only appear at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday in-game, when it's cloudy or raining, which can be very frustrating, especially because the game doesn't tell you when they show up, and it generally leads to a Google search. Google was my friend with this game, and it's even worse when they're required for the story progression. We're not done with missions yet. We still got normal missions. These are the standard side quests. You talk to an NPC, kill a monster, collect some alien junk, and then you call it a day. You'll find these all over the place or on one mission board in Blade HQ. Half the time it feels like busy work. One time I had to leave New LA just to talk to someone, then come back and talk to someone else. It was literally the definition of a fetch quest. It didn't help that I didn't know that I could fast travel from the inside to New LA to the outside, but still. Normal missions are also pretty important. Like, it's how I got my Skells license, those big mechs. Why are those not story missions? I don't know. And the last type of missions are the basic missions. These are your repeatable, grindy missions, which usually stuff like kill 5 of this thing, or collect 10 of this thing. You pick up these from the mission board too, and honestly, they kind of just run in the background while you're doing other stuff. They're not really exciting, but they're decent for farming cash and XP. And all these missions are completed on a massive open world map. Seriously, this is insanely impressive. This is one of the biggest and best open world maps I've experienced in gaming. It's designed incredibly well, and it's exceptionally impressive on the Switch, or even back on the Wii U. But I'll touch on the graphics and performance in a minute. This world is overflowing with a ton of content. First of all, for a game on Switch, it looks fantastic. Some areas are extremely impressive, like this beautiful rainforest looking zone, or even this vast dry desert area. I was honestly stunned. On this map, you'll be doing several tasks, but you'll also be constantly watching your back. Monsters and enemies are just everywhere, and they are not level scaled. You'll walk past a chill level 5 rabbit thing, and then immediately bump into a level 92 massive, what is this? You'll be dead before you even realize. So yes, exploring feels intense, it's exciting, dangerous, and every new area has even more spooky guys. And speaking of monsters, there are also these things called tyrants. this is the game's version of mini-bosses. They have markers, beefed up stats, and they'll kill you faster than normal. You're not meant to fight these guys early on, but if you manage to take one down, you'll usually get some pretty great reward, and you'll also unlock more of the map. Some of them even have weird spawn conditions, like the time of day, weather, or specific locations. But that's not it. There's also this entire probe/frontier nav system is what it's called. This is a huge part of the game and how progression works in Xenoblade X. Basically, as you explore the world, you'll come across these glowing hexagon panels on the map called probe sites. You'll usually see a massive red beacon, and that's where you can plant one. When you find one, you can install a data probe, which does a few things. It unlocks fast travel to that spot, it expands your survey completion for that region, which you need to progress the story, and it starts generating revenue for you over time. The revenue you earn comes in two forms. Moranium, which is a material used to upgrade arms manufacturers, which is the companies that make the weapon and gear, and money, which you'll be using to buy equipment, Skell insurance, we'll get back to that, and all sorts of upgrades. You can customize your probe grid by swapping in different types of probes, mining probes for more moranium, research probes for cash. There's also a whole little mini game of linking probes together in a network to increase efficiency and multiply your rewards. Now all of that, it sounds cool, but in practice, I didn't really love this system. Also, the Frontier Nav UI is just not it. Feels a little clunky, especially early on when you don't really understand what you're looking at. You're messing with numbers and probe types and link bonuses, so while I appreciate what it's trying to do, the whole probe system felt like a lot of unnecessary micromanagement for something that probably could have just been simpler. And the fact that it actually gates story progression if you don't place enough of them is not my favorite. Now I totally get why you would like it, and I did start enjoying it a little more after I got used to it and understood how it worked, but it took so long to understand it, and by the time I actually figured it out, I was just frustrated that it took so long. Now of course we gotta talk about Skells, because this is hands down one of the coolest parts of the entire game, and it's even on the box art, so yeah, it's important. These giant mechs were everything I was grinding towards for the first 20 to 25 hours, and when I finally got one, it was so worth it. It instantly opens up a whole new side of the game. Exploration becomes faster, combat feels more epic, and it finally makes you feel powerful. Once you've got one, the driving and flying mechanics are genuinely awesome. Boosting through the open world feels super smooth, and the mobility you gain is a game changer. Combat in a Skell is also insanely fun. You can fully customize your weapons and parts, and even buy entirely new Skells with different stats and playstyles. And of course, I named mine Beep Boop, because obviously. What's nice is that buying a new Skell isn't even that hard, especially if you've been saving your money from the Frontier Nav stuff. It's literally the only thing I wanted to spend my money on. And finally, the best part is that I can finally run away from enemies. Before the Skells, I'd be walking around, see some giant dinosaur, and get cooked. Now, I boost out of there so fast it doesn't even have time to know why it's mad. It feels so good not having to respawn every time I take the wrong turn. Now, Skells do come with insurance. State Farm is coming in with a clutch, even in space. You get 3 free revives, and if your Skell gets destroyed after that, it's gonna cost you. Repairs aren't cheap, but honestly, they're worth every penny. You can also refuel them at the main base or by waiting it out, which adds a tiny bit of strategy on how often you use them, but it's not too bad. That said, I'll admit, once I had my Skell, I didn't feel like walking anymore. Like, why would I? This thing is faster, stronger, cooler, it's everything. Exploring on foot just felt slow and clunky in comparison. Once you actually get a Skell, this game goes off. So that's the gameplay experience. Let's talk about the Switch quirks, because this is an open world game on the Switch. How is this not exploding? Remember how I said the game is half the size of the Wii U version? Yeah, I still don't know how they pulled that off, because after looking at side-by-side comparisons, this version undoubtedly looks better than the original. The Nintendo Switch version has higher quality models, reworked textures where they need to be, and even some of the main protagonist faces, Alma specifically, looks noticeably different. On top of that, the hair looks more hair-like, the colors are deeper and more vibrant, and the resolution is sharper overall. And like I mentioned before, the game's map is filled with foliage and a whole lot of personality in the art style. Now, I'm not gonna lie, while it does look good, this is on the Switch in 2025. I'll give it props for what it's doing, but like, come on, it's still not the prettiest game out there. In fact, for some people, it might still look extremely outdated, which, to be fair, it is a 10-year-old game. But listen, I had just beaten Horizon Forbidden West literally the night before this game came out. So going from that to Xenoblade X, my eyeballs were stunned. Horizon is a very similar idea, an open world game with massive creatures roaming around, but visually, it's on another planet. I don't want to go completely off topic here, but just look at what current gen console games are doing with visuals. It is wild. So needless to say, the first few hours of this game were a bit of a shock to the system. My eyes needed time to adjust, and my brain had to keep reminding me that this is running on a Switch. For a Switch game, this is stunning, but the performance is a little bit of a different story. It is good, For a Switch game, this game runs at 30 frames per second for the most part, and I didn't have any issues with that aspect. I am fine with a game being 30 frames per second as long as it's consistent. Obviously, if I had an option to go up to 60, I wouldn't prefer 30, but it is what it is. We're on Switch. The game does have some minor frame dips, but it really isn't nearly as bad as some other games. It generally only happened when something really intense was going on, but these little hitches never last more than a few frames, even when I'm loading into a new section of the map, which I have to say is incredibly impressive. You can walk across this entire massive map without a single loading screen, which is absolutely wild. And even the loading screens you do see are very snappy and don't waste anybody's time. I didn't have a single issue with that at all. Even booting up the game was impressively fast. Once again, considering that this is an open world game on an 8-year-old tablet. Oh, and there's also this motion blur that really covers up a lot of the jank and looks surprisingly good. They clearly optimized the heck out of this game, but that doesn't mean there aren't things that stand out due to the Switch's limitations, like the draw distance. You can see most necessities on the map, but there are also some creatures that just don't appear until you're right up next to them. You can also see some very noticeable pop-in with other assets like foliage, although once again they optimize the pop-in very well. It kind of just gracefully fades in instead of harshly snapping into view. They really did the best they could with what they had, and I respect that. It's better than another game I know of. The only time this really affected my gameplay in a noticeable way was when I was looking for a specific item on the map, like ship parts or probe beacons that let me know where to plant a probe. I'd be scanning the area trying to spot one, but because of the draw distance, it just wouldn't show up, and honestly, that was probably the most frustrating part of the Switch's hardware limitations. Now, Switch limitations aside, the overall game itself has some issues, like the pacing.
Yeah, and?
My goodness. The story overall is pretty good and genuinely engaging in a lot of moments, but there is so much filler, especially at the beginning. I couldn't stand it sometimes. And look, I can be a little impatient sometimes, especially if a game doesn't hook me right away. But I think the most important part of any game is the very beginning. That first impression should make me want to keep playing no matter what. Thankfully, the story itself did carry the opening, and if it weren't for that, I probably would have been pretty bored. It also helped that I came in knowing Xenoblade games are long, like really long. I remember watching my brother play Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3 and remember thinking, dang, these cutscenes never end. And this game is no different. Some cutscenes are flashy, dramatic, and cool. And then some are just your squad standing in a circle talking about nothing for 5 minutes. And it's annoying when you're just sitting there for minutes on end and the storyline isn't going anywhere. And then there's Tatsu. Now you might be thinking I'm saying some Japanese word, but no, I'm talking about this fuzzy little character person. He's a little creature that talks like a baby, skips words in every sentence because he's quirky, and everyone keeps making the same joke about him looking like food. And he doesn't even look like food. And then he gets mad every single time. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too old now, but man, it got boring fast. None of this would have been a big deal if there was just like a fast forward button or something, or even an option to skip one line of dialogue at a time. But nope, if you want to hear what's happening, you just have to sit there and wait. There were a couple times where I set my controller down and my Switch literally started dimming the screen because it was about to go into sleep mode. That's how long it was dragging on. And of course, it was always when Tatsu or some random alien person was on screen, when some random passerby would walk into the room and see what's on my TV and ask what I was watching. And it just made things weird. So while one of my biggest issues with the game was the amount of talking that was going on, it was also the lack of talking that got on my nerves. Let me explain. There were a lot of core gameplay mechanics that just aren't explained well, or at all. I eventually figured out most of the main ones to the best of my knowledge, but I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff I just never touched simply because I didn't fully understand it, or the game just never told me how it worked. This came up a lot in between story missions and would totally halt my progression. Things like the Frontier Nav system, or even how to respawn your mech after it explodes. I either missed the tutorial or it just wasn't explained clearly. A lot of the time, the game shows you these really quick pop-up tutorials in the middle of the screen with a tiny bit of text and a picture, and that's it. Personally, I feel like these mechanics should have been voice acted or at least introduced through some kind of hands-on required tutorial. It's hard to absorb all this info by just reading, especially when the game is throwing so many systems at you all at once. And trust me, there are a lot of mechanics in this game. So many, in fact, that I had to Google how several of them worked, which, in my opinion, should never have to be done in a video game at all. But I just couldn't keep track of everything. One other minor thing that felt off was the controls. The layout is kind of weird, and it made my hands curl up in a weird way I don't think nature intended. Also, why is the jump button ZR? Who made this call? Oh, also, this might be a hot take, but the music was just kind of all over the place. I do think it was good. Don't hear what I'm not saying. It has this really neat blend of orchestral and epic synthy music, and then suddenly there's a mix of rock and rap. Huh? That's right. It honestly gave me Sonic game vibes. Definitely a very anime energy. And for the most part, I didn't mind it. It's just different. I also don't really understand what's being rapped in the background. What are they even saying? The biggest problem I had with the rap stuff was when it would play during a cutscene, while characters are literally saying important dialogue. Listen, I'm not a game developer, but having full vocals playing over people talking is a big no-no. It's impossible to process both at once, so whatever's being said gets completely lost. I mean, imagine if there was a background song right now with vocals while I'm trying to talk to you in this video right now. It would be pretty annoying. On top of that, the mixing during cutscenes was rough in general. There were a few moments where the music was so loud, I just couldn't hear what the characters were saying. Sure, there were subtitles, and the average Joe probably wouldn't care, but I'm not Joe. During gameplay, it was totally fine, but in cutscenes, definitely could have been polished up. So I did have a handful of issues with this game, but I enjoyed it much more than I would have ever expected. I don't usually love the grind that JRPGs tend to bring, but I really didn't mind it in this one. But honestly, the most impressive thing here is just how many things the game does right. I always thought Xenoblade was some kind of a niche franchise, but the amount of work and detail Monolith Soft put into this game genuinely blew me away. And that's all Pokemon's fault. I don't want to drag on Pokemon too much, but when you get a niche open world game like this that looks and plays this well, and then you compare it to a rushed out hack job that was Scarlet and Violet, it really makes you question everything. The mechanics in this game are definitely flawed in places, but they're also incredibly polished and creative. Yes, the game is a little late, but I'm glad it's finally here. I didn't think I'd enjoy it as much as I did, but it really grew on me the more I played it. If you're into games like this, it might be worth sticking with to the end. It's got its flaws, but there's something really cool here, and honestly, seeing a game this big and ambitious run this well on the Switch just makes me wonder how we're still letting Pokemon get away with this. Also, apparently there might be a 60 frames per second mode for the Switch 2 version of this game. We'll have to wait and see, and that would probably make it better. Check out this video if you want to see me test out one-star Nintendo Switch controllers, and please consider becoming a channel member to support. I'll see you in the next one. See you later.